Well, we've got just 9 days to go until the round 5 of the Rugby Championship this year kicks off, and it's going to be a very interesting round, isn't it? So I thought I'd talk about where we are so far in the Rugby Championship this year, give you some of my views around the teams and specific players, and look forward to this next round. Let's get into it right now. G'day everyone, my name is Mark and this is Inside Rugby with Mark. Now, the Rugby Championship has been a fantastic competition so far this year, I think, because it's really shown us where the different teams are in terms of their evolution, and that's something I'm going to be really interested in looking at as we go into round 5, which kicks off in 9 days time. And we have teams number 1 and 2 so far in the standings, in South Africa and Argentina facing off against each other in Santiago. And we have the All Blacks playing Australia and Sydney, teams 3 and 4 so far in this competition. Who would have thought that would have been the outcome so far after 4 rounds of this year's Rugby Championship? Well, it's been really exciting so far for me this year because I've really enjoyed watching the different teams playing, looking at the new players that have come into those respective squads, as well as the new coaches, because yes, we've got 3 new coaches this year, haven't we, in terms of the Rugby Championship, and that's been something that's been really good to keep an eye on as well. Yeah. So as we know, South Africa is travelling to Argentina to take on the hosts in the first game, and then Argentina will be heading back to Nelspruit to take on South Africa at home. It's been an interesting squad named by Rassie, and of course, as we've all discussed on the channel here, there's been a lot of rotation going on and opportunities for other players to come through, but it's been an interesting selection for me. And in the next couple of days, I'm going to pick my team out of the squad that Rassie sent to Argentina to play in this game, so watch out for that video coming soon. But I think Rassie's going to play this first game fairly safe and have a strategy where he just grinds down the Argentinian team, and he's going to be making sure the execution is on point for South Africa. So everything they're going to do, they're going to make sure they do it very, very well. And this in turn is going to put a lot of pressure on the Argentinians. One of the many things I've been impressed with South Africa so far this year is their ability to be able to absorb pressure. So even against the All Blacks, when the All Blacks did score tries against them, they were able to make sure they bounced back. They kept calm, they kept patient, and they went back to their game plan. And that really worked out for them in that series against the All Blacks. So I think they're going to bring that same mentality against Argentina, and I think over the course of 80 minutes, that's where it's going to be a little bit too much for Argentina. Argentina are going to have their backs up, of course. They had that fantastic game against Australia. They beat the All Blacks in that first game in Wellington. So there must be a lot of motivation in this Argentinian team and a lot of self-belief, and I think we're seeing that on the field now. And I've talked in previous videos how the transition from Michael Cheika to Felipe Contepone has been very, very seamless. And I think that's a really good thing for this Argentinian team. Whereas you look at the All Blacks and Ian Foster to Scott Robertson, it's been anything but that. And Scott Robertson's had to take over with a whole lot of new players, bring in a new philosophy. Whereas Felipe Contepone, he was able just to keep going with what he was already developing with Michael Cheika. And we're now seeing the benefits of that paying off for Argentina. I have talked about their inconsistency, and I think that's going to be one of their biggest problems against these mighty South Africans in the next 2 games. What Argentinian team is actually going to turn up on the day? That's going to be the really interesting thing for me, because without a doubt they're going to have to bring their A game to have any chance against the Springboks team. Playing at home, they probably have more advantage and an opportunity to beat South Africa there if they are going to beat South Africa in one of these 2 games. But again, I think they're going to have to be very much on point. Now, some of the players that have really stood out for me in this Argentinian team so far in this series have been their loose forwards. I think Pablo Matera, Marcos Kremer and Juan Martin Gonzalez have been playing very, very good. They disappeared a little bit in that second game against the All Blacks at Eden Park. But besides that, I think they've been one of the trios of the Rugby Championship so far. So I think it's going to be really important for them to have a huge game against South Africa in this first game if the Argentinian Los Pumas are going to have any chance at all. There's no Peter Steph du Toit in this team for South Africa, and for me that's a really, really big thing because he's such a fantastic player, one of the best players in world rugby today. So Argentina are going to have to rely on that loose forwards doing a lot, but also their locks, and this is where I think they have a little bit of weakness. Lavanini, as we know, is a little bit emotional. He can be yellow carded, he can give away penalties, and I know from my Argentinian friends in the comments section of this channel that they're concerned a little bit about Lavanini being in there at lock. Pete on the other side has had a good series, and I think he's a good venture, but when you're looking at the likes of Etzebeth and Ruan Norkia, who have been playing very well for South Africa in the last couple of games, I think the solidarity of the South African locks are going to give the Argentinians a little bit of a hard time. But then when we talk about the front rows, well, Argentina's been doing very, very well, and I was really impressed with Sclavi in particular in that last game against the Wallabies. Not only was he good in the scrummaging time, he was brilliant in open play. He had a couple of really good runs. He did botch one try, but he was very, very prominent in general play. And if this is the type of rugby that Argentina are going to play against the Springboks, then they're going to be very, very dangerous. The problem to me is, are they going to be allowed to play that kind of game? And I don't think they are. I think South Africa are going to do everything to throttle Argentina in this game and keep them in a very small window of opportunity. I think Andre Pollard's going to get the start in this game, and I think he's going to be using his kicking to make sure that South Africa have territorial advantage against Argentina, putting them on the back foot and then using their set pieces to set up the platforms where South Africa are going to be able to score points in this game. And I think that's the thing that's going to take the wind out of the sails for Argentina. Because the Wallabies were so loose, Argentina were able to run from everywhere on the park. That's not going to happen, I think, against South Africa. South Africa are going to bring much more structure. They're going to bring a big defence as well, and this is going to put the pressure on Argentina. So I see one of their players, Albanoz, at number 10, being a really, really critical member of their team. I've been really impressed with this guy. He plays for Benetton in Europe, of course, and he's shown in the last couple of games that he's really owning that number 10 jersey for Argentina. And I think he holds the key to Argentina's success or failure in this game against South Africa. We're going to have to watch out for his kicking, because he's going to have to kick a little bit more in this game, because if Argentina are on the back foot, we're not going to see them being able to run the ball out of their 22 on every occasion. He's going to have to go for territory. So watch for Albanoz for me. I think he's going to be a very important part of this Argentinian team. So as I'm sitting here 9 days out from that first game between Argentina and South Africa, I'm just feeling that the South African framework and structure of their game and the different options that they have, I think we're going to see an open game from South Africa once we see that they've got some kind of dominance going forward. But that domination can't only just come from their forwards, it's also got to come from their kick strategy. So again, I think that's another reason why Andre Pollard's going to start this game for South Africa, and Rassie's going to make sure that South Africa have the emphasis going forward. And that's one of the things they've been very good at so far in this year's Rugby Championship. They did it against Australia, and then they were able to open the game up, and I think we're going to see something very similar against this Argentinian team. Now, there's no doubt about it for me, if Argentina continue on this trajectory for the next 3 years, they're going to be a very competitive side at the next Rugby World Cup in Australia. And it's going to be interesting now to see what Felipe Contepomi does with their evolution, because for me it's just the consistency that's missing. So for the next couple of games against South Africa, even if they don't win one or both of these games, as long as they put in an 80-minute spirited competition and they get very close to the Springboks, I think that can also be considered as a win. Of course, they'd love to win one game, if not two, but against the world champions playing the way they are at the moment, I think that's going to be a tall order. So I think the quality of performance is going to be important for Argentina. And we're hoping that we don't see the fall-off that we saw against the All Blacks at Eden Park. They played so well in that first game in Wellington, where they were able to execute when the All Blacks gave them the opportunities, and by stuffing up some of their plays, Argentina were able to score points and go on and win that game. Against the All Blacks, there was no fight at all until the last 20 minutes, and then we started to see some of their structure coming back into their game, and I thought they did quite well in that last 20 minutes against the All Blacks at Eden Park. The game was over by then. The All Blacks may have taken their foot off the pressure, but I thought Argentina started to develop some of their strategy again, and it was very good. They were very unlucky to lose that first game against Australia. Australia grabbed it in the last minute or so, and that was a key to Argentina's defence as well. They need to be turned on for 80 minutes, particularly against the South Africa team. So from South Africa so far in the competition, we've seen some really great standout players. Sasha Feinberg and Ngoma for me has been one of the standout players, but we've also seen brilliant performances from Peter Steph-Toy, of course. Eben Etzebeth has been brilliant in some of the games I've watched him play, and also we've seen some good performances from their front row, in particular Oxenshare for me has gone really well for South Africa. I was impressed with Grant Williams in the last game against the All Blacks. I thought his box kicking was very good. It made those kicks contestable. It put the All Blacks under a lot of pressure, and the All Black wings along with Will Jordan at fullback looked a little bit lost when Grant Williams was doing that. So I think that might be another combination that Rassie goes with Andre Pollard to start this game against Argentina. Also in the back lines, we saw a really big game so far throughout the competition from Damien Deolandi. We saw Jesse Creel play good in the game. We've seen Cheslin Colby be up there and be absolutely brilliant, one of the best in the Springboks team. I was also impressed with Fassi, and I think we're going to see him again, of course, against Argentina. So across the park, I've seen some really good performances from South Africa throughout the series. And of course, their bench coming on, and Quagga Smith has probably been the standout replacement for me so far from South Africa. As I said, I'll have a go at picking both of these teams over the next couple of days and send those videos for you to all comment on and let me know who you think's going to be playing in this game. But I think that's the approach Rassie's going to do. He's going to want to have a very solid start to this game so the crowd doesn't get into it. Argentina don't get some self-belief. And once they've got on top of that situation, I think we're going to see South Africa grind the Argentinians down through their structure and their framework of the game that they can play. And by structure and framework, I don't just mean through the forwards and by the bench. I'm talking about their whole game, because this South African team has the ability to play wide, but also go up the middle and put a lot of pressure on set piece. So those are the different options available to South Africa. I think Argentina needs to keep true to their DNA. They've been playing some great open, expansive rugby so far. They've got to make sure they don't run out of energy against South Africa. That's one thing they've got to be careful of. They're going to be making a lot more tackles than they did against the Wallabies. That's going to drain their energy, and if they're going to play an expansive game, you could find that they run out of energy in that last 20 minutes. And if South Africa bring on some reserves that can run over the top of you, well, we've seen what happens to the All Blacks in that situation. So Argentina will need to be very mindful of that. I think it's going to be a fantastic game in Argentina. There's lots of permutations that could happen in this one, and as we get closer to next week, I'll put out more videos about that particular game, and once the teams are announced, I'll have a look at those as well and give you my feedback and thoughts around what we might see on the pitch in Santiago. Okay, looking at the next game, and it's the Australian Wallabies against the New Zealand All Blacks. The teams in 3rd and 4th position in the Rugby Championship standing so far this year. Now this game will be the first game that's played next weekend, so just be mindful of that. And we're going to see this one in Sydney. So how have these two teams been going so far in the Rugby Championship? Well, I think both coaches and both groups of fans would be very disappointed in the progress so far from both teams. I've made videos about both. I've shared my views in a more intimate way and talking about where I think they're lacking. But I think the All Blacks really need to bounce back in this game against the Wallabies. They got psychologically beaten by South Africa, as well as playing strategically on the field. They weren't able to close out 20 minutes of both of those games at both Ellis Park and in Cape Town. And as a reason of that, they came up short against South Africa. South Africa were too good in those games, and the All Blacks need to tip their hat. But they also need to learn from it and come back and make sure they're able to come over top of the Wallabies. And what I think we need to see from Razor in that game, particularly in Sydney, is we need to see some changes in position. I think the All Blacks have been lacking in certain roles, and I've talked about that in previous videos. If you haven't seen those, maybe go back and watch my analysis of the second test match in Cape Town. I go into quite a bit of detail where I think the All Blacks are lacking. So I'd like to see the number 10 jersey changed for this particular game against Australia. I think we need to see something different. We need to give somebody else a go, and we need to see whether we can keep these All Blacks on the front foot, because when they're going forward, like most teams, they look very good. And to be honest, I think it's the backs for the major part that have been letting the All Blacks back down. If I sit down and look at all the games they've played so far, it was only really in the first half of that Argentina game at Eden Park where we saw the All Black backs really dominating. Since then, we haven't seen it. We've seen patches of it, and they haven't been cohesive as far as I'm concerned. 12 and 13 are a problem. Are we going to see changes there? We might see Rieko Ioane change for the All Blacks, and we might see a change at fullback as well. And definitely on the wings, that experiment for me in Cape Town did not work. So there's a lot of things the All Blacks can look for. On a positive side, I thought we saw some great plays from certain forwards so far from the All Blacks in this series. I'm talking about Tamaiti Williams, of course, who played outstanding. I think Cody Taylor was brilliant in Cape Town. And I think we've also seen good performances by Ethan Blackadder. And Ardie Savea's been coming and going in patches. I still think Ardie's playing in the wrong position, and I'd like to see him in the number 7 jersey. Other than that, the locking position again, I think when Patrick Tuipulotu comes back, All Blacks are going to look a lot better, but I have been impressed by Tupou Vai. I think he's been playing very well. And Scott Barrett, another for me, who's been playing a little bit under his best performance. And maybe the captaincy issue is something that's hanging a little bit on his head as well. Let me know what you think in the comments. I'm interested to know whether you think we need to have another chance of captain in the All Blacks and let Scott Barrett going back to thinking about playing his rugby at the best level. Now, when I read my comments here on the channel, which I always do from all of you, it's been interesting to read your feedback about the All Blacks. Some of you think, well, hang on a minute, they're not too far away. They nearly beat South Africa in both those games, which I would agree with, but they didn't. And they looked like they were losing it in both 20 minutes of both of those games at the end. For me so far this year, it's about putting the right players in the right positions for the All Blacks. And I'll give you an example. If you look at Albinos for Argentina, he's really come in and he's owned that number 10 jersey. And it's going to be really good to see how he goes against South Africa when he's got all that pressure against him. But for me, he looks like a natural number 10. Damien McKenzie doesn't. He looks like he's going backwards. He's got pressure on him. And he's indecisive when it comes to his game management. His kicking hasn't been good. He missed those penalties, which cost the All Blacks a game as well. So that's something else that needs to be looked at. So that's what I'm talking about when I talk about positional changes and looking at people that fit into the role. When Billy Proctor played against Fiji in San Diego, he looked like a number 13. He was straight into it. He did some great things that 13s do, and he should have been given an opportunity, and I hope he is given an opportunity against the Wallabies. And a lot of you will say, well, yeah, that wasn't South Africa, it was Fiji, but I don't care. He was still able to show what he's got in that 13 jersey, and I think he deserves another go as a result of that. So this is a huge game for Scott Robertson as the coach of the All Blacks. He doesn't want to lose the Bledisloe Cup after all these years to Australia. He doesn't want to lose to a Wallabies team that is absolutely struggling under Joe Schmidt. And he doesn't want to lose against the Kiwi coach in Joe Schmidt, that's for sure. So there's a lot on the line for Razor Robertson as he goes to Sydney. So there's going to be a lot of pressure in the build up to this game. And he's going to have to make sure, in my opinion, that he gets the selection right. If he does do that, I think the All Blacks will have too much for the Wallabies. Now let's talk about Australia, because haven't they been a little bit disappointing? But I don't want to sit here and just go all doom and gloom on Australia, because I don't see it like that. I do see glimpses of opportunity, and I do like the players that Joe Schmidt has brought into this team and that he's working with. And I have seen in different games moments of them doing very well. If we go back to Suncorp Stadium in Brisbane against South Africa, I thought the first 20 minutes of that game, they were very physical. They took it up to Australia. They were mentally switched on and they really wanted to play. So that quarter of the game of rugby was really, really good. Once South Africa got on top though, they lost it a little bit and their confidence was sapped, and it almost looked like, oh boy, we're going to be beaten by the world champions. And that's exactly what happened. Then they went to Perth and we saw that atrocious weather for both teams. It was difficult to play rugby. The Wallabies are a team I think that really need a dry track to go well on, and those conditions in Perth I think suited South Africa more than they did Australia, although South Africa was still too good in that game and came over the top of Australia. The Wallabies went to Argentina in that first game. They had atrocious weather conditions again in La Plata. And boy, what a game it was. And I've got to tip my hat to the Aussies because they won it in the last minute. And that shows a team that's dedicated and still playing. And they were patient, they were calm, they were mature in that last 5 minutes. And they got out of their own 22. They made their way down to the Argentinian line and they were able to score those points to win the game. So I think that was a massive boost to them, and I think that showed in the next game against Argentina when they came out and they were looking really positive. And again, they had a really good first 20 minutes of that game. They were up by 20 points to 3 at one stage, and they were playing open rugby. Their passes were being executed really well. They were nailing their strategy, and things were looking really, really good. Ben Donaldson was going well at number 10, I thought, and that's a position that Joe Schmidt's been really working on for this Wallabies team. But then it all fell over, didn't it? And it came from that mistake of Marika Korian-Betty. He knocked the ball on in the 30-something minute, and from that time the game just totally changed. And Australia went on the famous Aboriginal walkabout, and they were never to be seen again in a humiliating defeat by 40 points by this Argentinian team. So that would have been really disappointing, and that's not the way you want to go into facing the All Blacks, having that game under your belt. So I think, like Scott Robertson, Joe Schmidt's got a huge job to get this team up psychologically to play against the All Blacks. But I tell you what, when the Wallabies play the All Blacks, they grow an extra couple of arms and legs. They're always up for the encounter, and they always surprise the All Blacks as well in terms of how they're able to play. And I'm sure this is not going to be any different. I suspect the next 2 games against the All Blacks are going to be the Wallabies' best games in this year's Rugby Championship. I think they're going to be emotionally up for it. They're going to be seen as underdogs. They're going to be seen as though they've got no chance, particularly after that Argentina game. And if Joe Schmidt can get into their head in the right way, then I think they can be dangerous and they can turn on some good rugby against the All Blacks. Can they beat the All Blacks? Of course they can. Are they going to? I don't think so. I think the All Blacks are going to have too much for them. But what I want to see from this Wallabies team is an improvement over the course of 80 minutes. It's not going to be good enough for Joe Schmidt to keep going forward with this team playing well for 20 minutes or 30 minutes of games. They've got to put an entire game together. And it's been a little bit sad reading online in the last couple of days, people talking about the Wallabies are done, the British Lions need to go to South Africa and play a series and all the rest of it. I think that's fairly shameful talk. I think we need to support the Wallabies. We need to give them all the encouragement they can have, and we need to see them have really 2 good games now in round 5 and round 6 against the All Blacks. 1 in Sydney and 1 in Wellington in New Zealand. I mentioned earlier a couple of players for Australia have really stood out for me. I think Angus Bell is a fantastic forward. He's been playing really well for Australia. Taniela Tupou is a great prop, and he's won a lot of scrums so far for Australia in the series. And also we've seen Nick Frost doing some good things at lock. Rob Valentini is a brilliant number 6. He's been playing awesome for the Wallabies. And I think Harry Wilson at number 8 has been doing some good things, as has Tizano, the new boy they've brought in as far as their number 6 goes. So watch out for those players, because all they need to do is get some self-belief and they can be very, very dangerous. In the back line, I think that's where Australia are struggling a little bit. Tom Wright at fullback looks pretty good. Callaway on the wing is solid without being brilliant. Delgado on one wing has been good, and Koroibeti's come in and hasn't been the player of old. He's made a couple of simple mistakes which you don't normally see from Korian-Betty, and he's let this Australian team down. But it's 10, 12 and 13 where Australia have been struggling. Ikitau has played well on occasions, but he's against this All Blacks team. He's going to have to be up in the face in defence, and he's going to have to find some line breaks, as he did against Argentina in the first half. We didn't see him in the second half. Where did he disappear to? So Australia backline has got to click a little bit more, and I'd rather see Tate McDermott in at number 9 rather than Jake Gordon. I think when Tate McDermott comes on, he brings an energy, he's got purpose, and he's very good at reading the game. And I'd like to see Tate McDermott starting for the Wallabies against the All Blacks. So there's some of the players that have been impressing me, some of the others that haven't, and some of the positions we need to look out for Australia against the All Blacks. So again, once the 2 teams have been announced, I'll be talking more in detail about the players that have been selected and the possible strategies we're going to see from the 2 coaches. But when it comes to round 5 in Sydney, I think the All Blacks are going to have too much for the Wallabies. I think we're going to see some selection changes from Razor Robertson. Who's that going to be? I'm not too sure yet, but I will put out my selection in the next couple of days for you all to comment on. So there we go. There's a quick look at round number 5 of this year's Rugby Championship, coming up in 9 days' time. As I said, kicking off first of all with Australia versus New Zealand in Sydney, and then going over to Argentina in Santiago, where we're going to see Argentina take on the South African Springboks. Okay, now it's over to you in the comments and some of the things I'd like to know from you. Do you think the home ground advantage and that win over Australia is going to give Argentina enough self-belief to be able to go on and take it really close to the Springboks team? I'd really like to know that about you. Who stood out from you for the Springboks team? Who stood out from you from the Argentinian team so far in this year's competition? And let me know also on the All Black side, do you think the All Blacks are going to bounce back against Australia, take out their vengeance of those losses against the Springboks? Or do you think the Wallabies are going to be up for a surprise and come over the top of the All Blacks? I'd love to know your views in the comments. Okay, so just before I finish the show today, I'd just like to put up here 5 ways that you can support me on the channel if you like my content and you want to follow along the journey of me here with Inside Rugby with Mark. I'd be very, very appreciative of that. Okay then, well, thank you very much for watching my videos. I'll be back again soon with some more content talking about the build up to this round 5 of the Rugby Championship competition, watching Argentina and South Africa in Argentina, and watching New Zealand and Australia go into battle in Sydney, Australia. Until next time, it's time to say adios from beautiful Mexico, and I'll see you all again soon. Stay safe, stay well everyone. Bye for now.